talking about. I do have a legitimate question. One legitimate question that I've been asking everybody, nobody has the answer. What the hell happened to the emergency broadcast system on September 11th?
They're having a great deal of problems because of the shutdown on our own commercial aviation system. They're having problems getting people into location to respond to these incidents that we've been watching all morning in New York and now apparently in other parts of the country as well. So they're going to be turning to the military for some alternative aviation resources. And quite frankly, they're encountering a problem, they say, with a collapse of the infrastructure and the telephone company. Everybody is trying to call home and see how their loved ones are doing. And quite frankly, that's overloaded the circuit.
Podemos ver ahí la humarada de que esto yo creo que fue, Jorge, inmediatamente después de que se derrumbó una de las torres gemelas, y nos decía el señor Joaquín Carrasco, experto en terrorismo, hace unos minutos, por supuesto, información que no ha sido confirmada todavía, de que un avión había sido secuestrado y que iba rumbo a Washington, y también pues él especuló sobre la posibilidad de que se trate de grupos palestinos que están haciendo esto en represalia por la ayuda que los Estados Unidos le ha brindado a...
At Camp David. Dan, I will tell you one other thing, too, that the FBI and terrorist experts here have immediately noted, and that is today, September the 11th, is the anniversary of the Camp David Accords, signed at that historic location after weeks of negotiations between the Arabs and the Israelis, and of course has been a thorn in the side of both parties now for some years, and a source of great consternation. You can't help but notice, according to the FBI, the coincidence of the date, and now, if this is true, the coincidence of the target. Dan.
Jim Stewart in Washington. At the World Trade Centers, the Twin Towers in New York, both of which have
and now the collision. Flown deliberately into the second one.
When they say several, Bob, do they give you any indication of what they're talking about?
Several is the description that I had, and that was just passed on to me a moment ago, so I wasn't talking personally to the FAA person, but several is the account I had.
And Bob, American Airlines, the Flight 11 out of Boston, do we know what exactly kind of plane that was and perhaps how many people were on board?
We do not yet, but I think we're going to get some additional information from American. They were supposed to be adding comment to this from Dulles Airport here in a few moments, so we might learn a little bit more about that. But right now, it's very important to worry about rumors and so forth. I'd like to hear some more confirmation that a plane really has crashed in Pennsylvania, for instance, since the FAA hasn't confirmed that. But I think one needs to be very careful here in this chaotic situation.
We have a report here that Osama bin Laden, who is often identified as the world's leading terrorist, warned 3 weeks ago that he and his followers would carry out an unprecedented attack on U.S. interest for his support of Israel. An Arab journalist with access said to him Tuesday in London.
Abdel Bari Atwan, editor of the London-based Al-Qud Al-Arabi newspaper, said Islamic fundamentalists led by bin Laden was almost certainly behind the attack of the World Trade Center in New York. Quote, it's most likely the work of Islamic fundamentalists. Osama bin Laden warned 3 weeks ago that he would attack American interest in an unprecedented attack, a very big one, Atwan told Reuters.
He has interviewed bin Laden, and he maintained
outside. And I pulled these two in here. Deborah, tell us a little bit about your feelings when you hear that this is a possible terrorist attack.
I didn't know what to think. I was so afraid.
On-scene report to, this is a bulletin from CBS News. New York City Mayor Rudolph Giuliani says, and I quote, "There have been a tremendous number of lives lost in the series of attacks in New York today." New York City Mayor Giuliani says, tremendous number of lives lost in New York. We'll go back to Mika Brzezinski as time goes along with more of our eyewitness reports from, but we're going to right now go to Jim Stewart in Washington as we look at these horrific pictures from the World Trade Center. We go to Washington. Jim Stewart.
Dan, some details are starting to come into focus now. First, an update on the attack on the Camp David vicinity. Secret Service personnel tell CBS producer Bill Owens that there was no damage on Camp David itself. Apparently, the crash occurred near there. The presumption is that Camp David was the target. Now, we are given some information now by federal law enforcement authorities about the sequence of the hijackings today that have led to these incidents. We are told, and Dan, I have to stress this is sketchy information, but we are told that there were 4 hijackings. The detail that we've been given thus far on those hijackings is American Flight 11, which is described as a 757 from Boston to the West Coast, United Flight 175 out of Dulles International Airport outside of Washington, D.C., American Flight 77 from Dulles to Los Angeles, and United Flight 93, which apparently was from Newark en route to San Francisco. Now, the only firm information that the FBI has shared so far is that the United Flight 93, is apparently the aircraft that went down in the vicinity of Camp David. It is believed, they say, that it is American Flight 11, and I believe this has been reported already by CBS. American Flight 11, the 757 aircraft from Boston, was one of the 2 aircraft involved in the World Trade Center. It is not clear where the other 2 aircraft crashed, but it is confirmed, the FBI says, citing the FAA, I should add, that these are the 4 aircraft that have been involved in the hijackings, were involved in the crashes today. One other significant piece of information, Dan, is apparently there is and has been some communication from the aircraft after they were hijacked. We are led to believe that
causing major problems for the people in Lower Manhattan and in parts of Brooklyn and Queens, as that smoke billows in a westward, from the west in an eastward direction. There was a storm in Manhattan last night that cleared away muggy weather, and that storm brought with it
de metal que se cayeron por ahí unos 20 segundos después. Entonces yo creo que por lo menos la torre no tiene edificios altos después entre la 26 y el distrito financiero. Entonces yo tengo una vista sin obstrucción, la puedo ver claramente al fuego, y ahora se ve que veo
in a position apparently to coordinate events there now. So much of what's happening in terms of a response
workers, so we are talking about roughly 10,000 people per tower. Now, at this point, obviously, you've got a situation, these towers having collapsed, that is bordering on chaotic. What's the first challenge? What are you doing?
Building 5, 6.
Okay.
Right, and I was in building 5. We had to dig our way out to get out.
You dug your way out. What was that like?
Scary.
Scary, but I was a volunteer fireman for years, so you learn not to panic.
Yeah. What was the one last thing? What do you do right now to try to get to those people? How long before you get to those people?
We're going to have to wait, make the building safe. We have our engineers here, our law department here. We're going to make the building safe, then we're going to send in rescue teams. We're already breaking the men and women up into rescue teams, and they're ready to go once the building.
And an Arab journalist with access to bin Laden said today that bin Laden was, quote, almost certainly, unquote, behind the attack on the World Trade Center in New York. But of course, that is his opinion. We go to CBS News Chief Washington Correspondent Bob Schieffer in Washington with details on what's happening to make sure that the government is steady from the top and remains in command and in steady, paced command, calculated command throughout the day. Bob?
Well, Dan, you spent many years in Washington, so you'll recognize where I am. I'm about a block north of the White House, and in contrast to all of those scenes of devastation that you're seeing in New York, look, from my vantage point across Washington, I can see the White House, the Washington...
This is what caused the actual destruction of the World Trade Center towers earlier this morning as they collapse. As you see there, the first tower collapsing, the second tower collapsing moments later. Rita Cosby's on the phone. Rita, Secretary Weinberger was telling us that it is, in his mind, it was unlikely that even if Osama bin Laden had been involved, he could have carried this out, the coordination out by himself. That indeed there must have been other parties involved, perhaps even government parties involved, just to get all the weapons necessary to do what they did. Is it likely that other governments were involved? And if so, what does the United States do?
Yeah, it certainly is very likely. U.S. officials are saying that that is one of the possibilities. And remember, bin Laden is a very widespread network. We always sort of refer to him as the mastermind, certainly the man behind it. But he has tentacles all over the globe, including tentacles here in the United States.